Okay, let's start. All right, good morning. Earlier today, the Secretary General spoke at the 12th session of the Conference of States Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. He stressed that disability inclusion is a fundamental right and that realizing the rights of persons with disabilities is a matter of justice as well as a common sense investment in our common future. When we remove policies or biases or obstacles to opportunity for persons with disabilities, the whole world benefits, he said. The Secretary General acknowledged that we have a long way to ensure full accessibility, including in the UN. With this in mind, he announced the launch of the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, which seeks to raise the standards of the UN's own performance on disability inclusion across the board. It is very simple. We can no longer be a platform for change when persons with disabilities cannot access that platform to speak, he said. His remarks are available to you. The Security Council today is holding an open meeting on the protection of civilians in armed conflict. Speaking on behalf of the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, was Rina Gilani, the Director of Advocacy and Operations in OCHA. She told Council members that alarming numbers of people go missing in armed conflicts, whether they are captured or held incommunicado, or victims of extrajudicial executions for merely fleeing violence. She stressed that, as the Secretary General said in his report on the issue, parties to conflict must respect and ensure respect for international humanitarian law, which prohibits enforced disappearances. And in a statement we issued after the press briefing yesterday, the Secretary General expressed his outrage at reports of an attack in central Mali that resulted in the killings of at least 95 civilians and many injuries as well. He called on the Malian authorities to investigate the strategy and to bring the perpetrators to justice. He also urged the government and all others to engage in intercommunal dialogue to resolve tensions and differences. The UN peacekeeping mission in Mali reports that a majority of the victims in Sunday's attack in Mopti in central Mali were women and children, while a number of civilians remain missing. The UN mission has deployed a human rights fact-finding mission comprised of human rights officers, UN police, and forensic and ballistic experts, and it continues to assist the Malian prosecutor in launching an investigation. And the Secretary General joins the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, and the Acting Executive Director of UNAIDS, Gunilla Carlsson, in warmly welcoming the landmark decision by Botswana's High Court to decriminalize consensual same-sex relations. Botswana is the 9th country in the past 5 years to have decriminalized consensual same-sex relationships. Consensual same-sex relationships remain criminalized in at least 67 countries and territories worldwide. And the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, met yesterday with the President of Yemen, Mr. Mansour Hadi, and that meeting took place in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. During the meeting, Ms. Hadi and Ms. DiCarlo discussed the work of the Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, the way forward for implementing the Stockholm Agreement, and for returning to dialogue to reach a political solution to the wider conflict in Yemen. And that based on the Gulf Cooperation Council's initiative and the implementation mechanism, the National Dialogue Conference outcomes, and all relevant Security Council resolutions. The discussions were productive, with Ms. DiCarlo thanking the President for his government's commitment to the full implementation of the Stockholm Agreement. And turning to Sudan, our colleagues at UNICEF say that today at least 19 children have been killed and dozens injured in the country since June 3rd. The executive head of UNICEF, Henrietta Fore, is calling for an end to the violence. She said that she's gravely concerned at the impact of the continuing violence and unrest in the country on children and young people, especially the reported use of excessive force against peaceful protesters. UNICEF has received information that children are being detained, recruited to join the fighting, or sexually abused. Many parents are far too scared to let their children leave the house, fearful of violence, harassment, and lawlessness. UNICEF is continuing to work to help children in the face of unrest, providing millions of children, including those who have been displaced and are refugees, with vaccines, safe water, treatment for severe acute malnutrition, and psychosocial support. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., there will be a briefing here by Maria Soledad Cisneros Reyes, the Secretary General Special Envoy on Disability and Accessibility, and others on the ongoing conference of the states parties on the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. Then at 12:45, there'll be a briefing by Navid Hanif, the Director of Finance for Sustainable Development Office in DESA. He will brief you on the launch of the World Investment Report. And before I turn things over to Monica, I'm turning things over to you. Yes, sir.
As you mentioned, the Security Council just adopted a very important resolution of missing persons in arms conflict. And as you know, beside the hundreds of thousands that are missing, as it was mentioned, tens of thousands are still missing in the countries of Western Balkans, starting with Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, etc. Will the Secretary General, is Secretary General ready to move step forward beside what he mentioned in his report and ask for responsibilities from the countries who are not doing enough because families are kept waiting, they're suffering, etc.
So, of course, I mean, the fact that people remain missing for years after a conflict is not only a national tragedy for these countries, but obviously a personal one for the families. And it's incumbent on the authorities in those countries to do their utmost to try to solve the issue. Abdelhamid.
What about responsibility?
Well, I think, as I said, it is their responsibility. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. On Friday, Mr. Mladinov tweeted a statement in which what was interpreted as interference in the internal affairs of the Palestinian Authority. He criticized what he called corruption. First, is that within his mandate to talk about internal issues? Second, there are many cases of corruption, including the Prime Minister of Israel. Had he ever issued a statement criticizing similar cases within Israel?
I think Mr. Mladinov spoke out within the remit of his mandate.
This is a clear case of internal interference.
You have your opinion. I think I've answered.
I can
your
read
question.
it for you.
No, I know. I've read it as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Stéphane. You mentioned Yemen, Hodeidah, the implementation of the Stockholm Agreement. I know it gets a bit complicated when we're talking about phase 1, phase 2, etc. But where are we up to now in terms of the redeployment from the ports and the city by the Houthis?
We are at the situation where we last left the situation. There has been no movement since we last reported it, I think, a few weeks ago.
When Lawless spoke to us.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
No change since then?
Not that I know of, but I know not all, and we will get an update. Ms. Landry.
Stéphane, do you have an update on the Bahrain conference, whether the UN will be going?
No, I will share an update as soon as I'm able to share one. Yes, sir.
Just a follow-up, Steph. When it comes to responsibility, indeed, I mean, we had ICTY for former Yugoslavia. We do have now a residual mechanism, and I'm saying that in previous times we had a very active statements from the Secretary General, etc. If these situations turn to ongoing in this direction, that the responsibility is really not taken by the countries, as you mentioned, will the Secretary General step up and say something on that?
I mean, I think our position is that those countries in every corner of the world where there remains... Am I saved by the bell? Our position is very clear that in those countries throughout the world where there remains questions about the fate of people, whether they've been detained, whether they've been killed, missing people in conflict, the responsibility to shed light on this situation lies with the national governments, and we will do, of course, whatever we can to assist.
Thank
Round
you.
two.
Back to Yemen, the Security Council issued a press statement expressing support of Mr. Griffiths. You know, Saudi Arabia has been asking to remove him from his office. So do we understand that now the Security Council is standing behind Griffiths and not accepting the Saudi call for his removal?
I think that would be... I don't interpret resolutions, but if I were, that would be my interpretation. I think, as we said, Mr. Carlo had very good meetings with various people in Saudi Arabia, and I think there is clear support for the work of Mr. Griffiths. It's important that that support now translate into moving the process forward, and Mr. Griffiths will be briefing, I think, the Security Council, I believe, on Friday this week. Evelyn.
Yes, thank you, Steph. On the Bahrain conference, one purpose is to abolish UNRWA. Is anyone from the UN going to speak to UNRWA ahead of time, during, afterwards, like in the SG's
Is anyone from where?
Beg your pardon?
I would like to have the person who asked the question repeat it. Did you said who should speak to UNRWA?
I'm saying, is anyone going to speak in defense of UNRWA
Well, I think,
before the conference, during the conference,
there is
after?
First of all, our support for UNRWA is unwavering. Whether it's from here, whether it's the Secretary General, I think the Commissioner General himself was very eloquent in his defense of UNRWA during a recent Security Council meeting. My understanding is that there will be a pledging event very soon here at headquarters, which the Secretary General will most likely attend. And as I told Carol, as soon as I have an update on whatever level of participation at the Bahrain conference, I will share that with you. Madame.
Do you have any updates regarding Sudan? And did Ms. Di Carlo speak with the Saudi officials about the Sudan issue, especially given the fact that they are close or in good relations with the military council?
On Mr. Carlo's meeting, I shared what I have. We are obviously continuing to follow with great concern the situation on the ground in Khartoum, whether it's, as the executive director of UNICEF, Henrietta Fore, expressed concerning the children. We would want to see an immediate end to the use of excessive force, a restarting of the political dialogue. We would also call for the authorities to stop arresting and detaining people who have themselves a significant role to play in those negotiations, as well as a full restoration of the internet and other means of communications. We continue to call on all concerned to resolve and work together to ensure peaceful, civilian-led transition and sustainable peace throughout the country. 1 second. Sir.
Yes. 2 quick questions. First of all, it was suggested, at least I believe by Germany at a Security Council meeting, that the date of the UNRWA pledging meeting here at headquarters, I believe, is on June 27th, be moved so it doesn't conflict with the Bahrain conference date. Has there been any follow-up?
I don't have the exact date in my head, but I will check the official. Date.
As to whether they conflict or not with the Bahrain?
I will check the official. We don't control the Bahrain event. I will check on the official date of the UNRWA conference.
And the second...
No, Evelyn, I know. I'm just saying I will check. Thank you.
The second question is, does the Secretary General have any comment on the report yesterday, or statement yesterday by the AEA chair, as to Iran's increased uranium enrichment that may go beyond the limits set in the nuclear deal?
Oh, yeah, I mean, he has seen the statement by Mr. Amano. The IEA is clearly in the lead on dealing with those issues for the UN system, and he fully supports the work of the IEA, and he also continues to believe that everything should be done to try to support and salvage, in a sense, the JCPOA. Errol?
Yeah, did the Under-Secretary General Di Carlo had a chance to tackle the issue of human rights in Saudi Arabia?
I've shared what I've been able to share with you. Sir, and that'll be the last question.
Yes, thank you, Stéphane. My question is situation in Venezuela. At this point, last week you read a report of the more than 4 million migrants from Venezuela. And the special envoy for the UNHCR, she was visiting the refugees camps in Colombia. And she says the situation there is a situation that life or death. So my question is the Secretary General agree with this characterization? And what is his message at this point with the situation that is still increasing in these regards?
Well, we think at the heart there needs to be a political solution, that serious political discussions need to be had for the internal process. And that obviously whatever the international community can do to support those Venezuelans who have fled, whether refugees or migrants, and support the countries which are hosting them is critical. Thank you very much. Monica, you're up.